Hello, my name is Elliot of Tool Nerd TV, and welcome to this week's episode of Box to Box Score for Game Week 5. We're going to go straight into Game 1 of the Premier League here. We've got Ben Dinnery against Fuzzy Warbles. This is Fuzzy Warbles winning. Again, it's the third time in a row, actually, for him this season. His third game in succession where he's won. And it was largely, actually, thanks to the performance of Michel Vorm, which really quite surprising when you consider perhaps he was at fault for both of Tottenham's goals conceded to Liverpool this weekend. Arguably, there were other players at fault as well, but Michel Vorm scoring 29 points. The 8 saves he made, probably the saving factor there, but how much better could it have been if he hadn't have let those 2 goals in? You kind of ask yourself. We move on to the next game with TR Kingston with by far and away the highest score of this week. Most points out of anyone in any of the divisions in EFSA. Mostradama is actually suffering his second consecutive defeat, having started unbeaten in the first 3 games. Mostly Kingston has to thank Nicolas Otamendi coming in as a kind of a surprise, as well as David Silva. Man City were a pretty dominant win over Fulham. Never looked too troubled, despite Fulham making a decent sort of account for themselves, playing away from home against the champions, but ultimately coming up short, of course, because Man City are just a bit too good. David Silva with a pretty monstrous 27 points, and then Otamendi with 25 points, obviously for his clean sheet and overall contribution to the game. So we'll move on to the third one here. A pretty close game between Jason UK and Roto Z Droik, just about by about 5 points. Jason coming out on top on this one, and this is mostly down to the fact that Man City was quite so dominant over Fulham at the weekend. I mean, Roto had the contribution from Leroy Sané, of course, of 23 points there, but the 21 points from Kyle Walker, obviously the clean sheet, as well as, again, his overall contribution. The fact that he was able to play more in Fulham's half than not meant that he was able to contribute towards a win for Jason on this one. So we move on to the next one. We have JWL against TAMC. This one is an interesting one. I'll get on to JWL in a second. Pretty low total from in this week, but TAMC picking up the win, mostly thanks to, a solid performance from Crystal Palace against Huddersfield. Obviously, their 1-0 win at the weekend, as well as Shane Duffy for Brighton scoring a goal, which was pretty surprising against Southampton. And Højbjerg with his pretty monumental goal. If you haven't seen it already, then you need to give it a look, because it's one of the more impressive goals you'll probably see this season from a very unlikely player. So well done to Mac for actually picking this one in this case. We move on to the next game where we have Gavin against Nikhag. Now we have Nikhag with, unfortunately, his 3rd straight loss so far this season. Gavin actually able to maintain top position thanks to this win, mostly thanks to, you can see Wes Morgan there, his -2 points. We don't often see minus points totals in this game, but obviously his red card saw to that. But we also see Ryan Fraser for Bournemouth with the pretty monstrous 30 points that he scored, thanks to his 2 goals and an assist for Bournemouth this weekend, where they really just kind of blew Leicester away. Leicester managed to kind of make it look a little bit more respectable than it was, but Leicester for a long time were just sinking without trace, and it was really quite surprising to see them play as badly as they did. I know they're not great away from home, they don't tend to score too many, but for Bournemouth to be quite as dominant as they were was definitely a surprise. So that was definitely the big contributor there to Gavin's win, which, as I mentioned, means he retains top position in this league, and just a little bit of daylight now opening up between him at the top and the rest of the teams behind him. Now, I mentioned JWL, and he's a little bit unlucky, perhaps, to be where he is with the record that he has. Because if you see the points total he's got, 626 points, is by far the best out of any team outside of the top 4 at the moment. Really, he could just say that he's probably unlucky argue that he's conceded the most points out, as it were, and it really it's rough to say that he conceded them, because it's just skill or luck of the other team that means that he's conceded that many. But I mean, really, perhaps a false position for him. Really, things should start to turn around for him pretty soon with the team that he's got and the points that he's scoring. It should even itself out pretty soon. Now, before we move on to the next league, the next round of games, we have time for a word from our sponsor, which is the Irish Biltong Company. They're one of the finest high-protein health snacks on the market. They're premium quality biltong made from the very best cuts of beef, so definitely worth checking out. They're actually the new kit sponsor for Fancy Yomar as well, going forward this season, so we'll be seeing a lot more of them as we go ahead this season. We move on to the first game in the championship. Jay Forker, with this win, managing to retain his top place in the championship in a pretty low scoring game with FPL MNOP. We got Josh King being the main contributor to Jay Forker here, with his 24 points, of course, a goal and an assist. Pretty much everyone, like I mentioned, from Bournemouth, really just doing quite well. Like I mentioned, blowing Leicester away in this particular game, which was really quite surprising. We move on to the next one here. We have Tom Sunderland against Gary Irwin, with Tom picking up the win in this one. Another pretty low scoring game, but he was really helped by Man City's clean sheet, with Laporte picking up 23 points, as well as Yarmolenko. West Ham suddenly came to the party. They suddenly managed to pull out the performance of a lifetime against Everton, who looked really quite lost in the game, which really quite surprising, especially at home against a team like West Ham, who looked as though they were in freefall. But Yarmolenko picking up 2 goals, suddenly announcing himself in the Premier League, so perhaps one to watch for the future. Who knows? We move on to the next game, where we will see Fancy Yomar picking up a decent win against Roto Wyatt Andrew. Now, Yomar has the longest active winning streak out of anybody in either of the EFSA leagues, winning 4 games in a row now, and it's mainly down this week to Doherty of Wolves, actually, who were very impressive away from home to Burnley, keeping a clean sheet and just never really looking like they were in trouble. I said they were away from home, they were actually at home, sorry. So it looks like that when they're playing at Molyneux this season, they'll look like a decent team to be playing against. But then a lot of us probably knew that they were going to be pretty well set for a decent Premier League season this year. So we move on to the next game. Only got a couple more to go, I think. CJ Radun against DFS Hambazaza. So CJ Radun picking up his first win of the season with 130 points, so a decent performance overall. Raheem Sterling finally getting off the mark, as it were, getting a goal for Man City against Fulham, which was really setting them on their way, really. And Wilfried Zaha as well, who scored a cracker of a goal. If you think this goal is good, you should see Højbjerg's as well. But Zaha's goal, excellent from just outside the area. It was very clean strike indeed. Hambazaza never really had a chance. There was no luck or no miraculous goal scoring performance from Billing this time against Crystal Palace, unfortunately. So we have the final game before we move on to the championship table. Neil Thurman against Sports by Gotti. Neil Thurman picking up the win here in this one, mainly thanks to the big performer of the week, who was Eden Hazard, who scored 3 goals. So he got his hat-trick for Chelsea, looking like an essential fantasy football asset, because he looks like he's just in one of those moods where he could just play anybody off the park, basically. So he scored 42.8 points, which is huge. But yeah, it really just blew Sports by Gotti away in this particular case. Were it not for Hazard, it would have been a much closer game, of course, but here we are. So we look at the championship table, and Jay Forker, like I mentioned, staying at the top of the league, but Fancy Yomar just kind of breathing down his neck a little bit at the top. It's by no means a foregone conclusion at the moment. Of course, it's very early in the season still, of course, but those 4 wins have really elevated him after a loss to start the season. So with CJ Radun also picking up his first win, there's no longer any winless teams, which is fantastic. Good to see. Nobody is fully out of it just yet. So before we go, just time to look at the team of the week. As we can see, Alex McCarthy for Southampton, who was in goal for them in their 2-2 draw against Brighton, made plenty of saves, which no doubt contributed to all his points. We had Nicholas Otamendi, obviously the clean sheet for him. Duffy and Doherty, pretty impressive performances, as I mentioned, which I've explained during their games for Brighton and Wolves. James Maddison, who grabbed one of the consolation goals for Leicester against Bournemouth. His underlying stats again were impressive. You got Ryan Fraser as well, of course, who was again a real star for Bournemouth, and Højbjerg, who for his goal alone deserves to be in the team in a week, but obviously his stats and his points total were also very good as well. And then you've got the goals of Hazard and Yarmolenko up top. So both of them players doing really well for themselves and vital contributors to their team's wins. And that is actually going to be it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this week's video. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to see next week's video. We do this every week here on the EFSA Leagues, where we'll recap all of the games that are played every weekend. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.